Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Krishna C. Nadella, and this is State of Mind at Penn State University, filming from the Delta Chi fraternity. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Krishna C. Nadella, and this is State of Mind. Today's topic is about misogyny on campus. On Sunday, January 18th, 2015, Brock Turner, a Stanford freshman student athlete, was arrested for sexually assaulting an unconscious female college graduate behind a dumpster near the Alpha Kappa fraternity, where she was attending a party with her sister. The story made national headlines for multiple reasons, including the open letter penned by the victim, the statement made by Turner's father, the light sentencing that Turner received, and the reasoning behind it from the presiding judge, Judge Aaron Persky. At a more holistic level, the case represented a very real undercurrent that exists in the college environment, that of misogyny. With us here today to shed light on the topic and to provide his perspectives is Paul Apicella, Title IX Coordinator at Penn State University. Paul, thank you for joining us on State of Mind. Let's level set first and foremost with a few definitions. What is Title IX?
Good question. Title IX is a federal civil rights law that very broadly states that no institution that receives federal funding can discriminate against anyone on the basis of their sex or gender. So that is a very broad law. It very broadly, protects anybody from discrimination. However, what we've seen in the news more recently in the press in recent years are that it also applies to issues related to sexual assault and other forms of sexual violence.
All right. On that note, what is misogyny?
Another good question. Misogyny as an attitude is actually a bias or prejudice against women or girls. That attitude can manifest itself in a variety of ways, including varying different forms of discrimination and violence against women.
All right, so now that we have established that, what is the current state of sexual harassment and violence on college campuses in America?
That's a more difficult question to answer than it may seem, but I think a simple way to address it is to say nationwide, not just at Penn State, but also at Penn State, we've got a lot of work to do. And so we see that in the national numbers. For example, there are national studies that have shown that something like 1 in 5 young women will be sexually assaulted during their undergraduate career. Other forms of sexual violence as well. The numbers there are not looking very good. And what that tells us is that, again, nationwide, we have an issue on college and university campuses related to sexual harassment and violence that we really need to address.
So as we were planning for the summer, we were thinking about topics, we were talking to our focus groups. We had a whole host of topics that were asked to be talked about over here at Penn State University. This was one topic that students wanted to hear about, but clearly you're not a student on this series. And so what I was able to ascertain was that they wanted to hear more about this topic, but they didn't feel like they were knowledgeable enough to speak to it. Mm-hmm. And in that regard, there was also such tremendous anger towards what happened. Why did this specific case make such national headlines?
Good question. And to go to the fact that this is what people wanted to hear about, but a lot of students don't seem comfortable talking about the issue, I think is part of the problem. I think we have to get more comfortable, all members of the community. I don't own this space. The administration doesn't own this space. Students are a big part of this space, but they don't own it either. We all hold a piece of turf here. And so I think we need to address that. We all need to get a little more comfortable putting these issues out in the open and addressing them. And to your question about why the case involving the Stanford swimmer Brock Turner captured the nation's attention, I think there are a couple key pieces there that made it a pretty sensational story. One of them was that this relates to issues of sexual violence, which is a big part of the news. It involves a Greek organization and a fraternity party. It involves alcohol. It involved an athlete, right, a high-profile, very successful athlete, and it involved a high-profile, very successful institution. And then on the back end, when it came time for the criminal justice system to do its part, we saw issues with the sentencing, and we also saw that we had a survivor in this case who was very capable of expressing her point of view and how this experience affected her, and wrote a really compelling, something like a 12 or 13 page letter that was a really fantastic piece of writing about what it's like to be a survivor in one of these incidents. And so all of those things put together, I think really went a long way in capturing the nation's attention.
So let's break it down. Let's start off with the sentencing. What's to be made of it? It was incredibly light. In fact, specifically to the judge's reasoning that a lengthier penalty would have a severe impact on Turner. Who's the real victim here?
Right. I think that's a fair criticism, and I have to acknowledge that while I read the same stories that I think everybody else read in the paper, I wasn't there for the trial. I didn't read the full transcript or the full judge's reasoning. However, that doesn't sound good, right? That doesn't sound like the kind of messages that we want to send to victims of sexual assault. It's not the kind of message we want to send about the state of our criminal justice system. I will say it is true that there are times that judges will consider the impact on a particular defendant at the sentencing phase. However, here, I think everyone really got the sense that there was something else going on, that perhaps if Brock Turner wasn't a young, affluent, white male going to Stanford who was a successful athlete, that he may have had a different outcome. I don't know if that's the case, but I do think it's a really fair question.
All right, so let's move on to the second point you made, Greek life. State of Mind's very proud to partner with Greek Life here at Penn State University for this series. But we also have a lot of people in the audience, and so what is the responsibility of the Greek community in this regard? Did they help encourage this type of culture? And if not, then what was ultimately the impetus for this incident? And if they did help stem this type of culture, what are they doing about it?
I think there are a couple of different questions in there. I think I'll start with the first one. Maybe you can remind me of the other ones once I answer the first one. So about the responsibility of the Greek community to address these kind of issues. First, I think we have to note that there's a fantastic opportunity that Greek organizations have for a variety of reasons, because of their stature in the community, the civic community, the academic community, the social life, and the role that Greek organizations play there at the university. It really provides a great opportunity for Greek organizations, first and foremost, to be an agent for change. And there's that old cliche that says, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that's where the responsibility piece comes in, is because these organizations are high profile, because they touch so many students in so many different parts of the university, that it really gets to a point where I think that Greek organizations really have to look at themselves and say, we need to take a stand against these issues, these kinds of important issues in our community.
So how does alcohol and substance abuse play into this culture?
It's a major player in the culture for a variety of reasons. I think it's pretty well established now that the #1 date rape drug is alcohol, right? We hear about roofies and GHB and these other kinds of drugs. In actuality, alcohol is the #1 date rape drug, okay? And so there are numbers about this as well. Something like upwards of 70% of sexual assaults involve use of alcohol by either the survivor or the perpetrator. I think those numbers really hold true. And so it's also important to note that not only is alcohol an instrument that an individual who may be a predator may use in order to sort of make their victim vulnerable, it also creates an opportunity for other individuals who may not necessarily be purposeful or patterned predators, so to speak. It provides an opportunity and a mode that makes people vulnerable, lowers inhibitions, and it just creates a situation where more of these incidents are going to happen because it is high-risk behavior.
So let's talk about solutions and being a force for good. We have fraternities all across America. We have young men who believe in equality amongst the sexes. We have young men who are doing amazing things with organizations to help make the world a better place, and Greek life is at the heart of that. What can the Greek community do, and from an action item standpoint, do to help take a positive out of all of this?
I think a primary thing that the Greek community can do, both as a whole and as individual organizations, they can take a public stand against these issues. And then they can back up those words and those gestures with action, right, in a variety of ways. One, Greek organizations can make efforts to have their members attend bystander intervention training, right, so that they are learning about these issues, the way that they manifest themselves, and they're putting it on the radar, and they're saying, listen, that's not going to be the culture here. We can have parties, we can have social functions, we can be sort of a fun-loving group, and we can be a center of the social culture here at the university. But what we're not going to do is we're not going to create an environment where we have young people who are being victimized, right? And there are a variety of ways they can do that. Some of it deals with, again, the parties and controlling the alcohol usage and things like that. Some involves having sort of sober individuals at the parties watching for high-risk behavior, those sorts of things. So I think there's a lot they can do, and I think it really does start with taking a public stand.
All right, now let's shift the attention to a different group. Baylor football, Miami football, Louisville basketball. From a student-athlete perspective, why is this such a constant theme that we see throughout the news? And I understand we only see what's salacious in the news.
Sure.
But is there an undercurrent that we have to look at from a student-athlete perspective?
Well, numbers are hard to come by, right? So you'd like to have firm statistics that say, well, here, there is a higher rate here than there is over there. I don't know if we have that. And you mentioned it being salacious. The fact of the matter is that student athletes are high-profile members of the community. And so whenever there's an incident that involves a student athlete, it's naturally going to get more attention. Okay. We also have an environment, however, that because student athletes are such high-profile members of the community, they interact with the community a little bit differently than the average person might. Right. They have opportunities socially and different things that different pieces of the university life that open up to them that aren't open to everybody necessarily. And so I think they naturally are in some different situations than the average student is. I think both of those kind of interplay together.
And we're starting to hear more about the socially responsible student athlete, and hopefully that extends to the student athlete as well. It may be the same answer that you gave towards the fraternity life, but what steps can student athletes do to also take a stand against this?
It's the same answer. I think first of all, taking a public stand, building awareness, right? Increase, doing what they can to educate themselves so that they are able to intervene on each other's behalf, right? Bystander intervention is a huge part of it, right? It's a key factor in culture and climate change, is that if we have people out there who are recognizing these issues and are saying, hey, that's not okay, I'm going to step in and stop that, then we can make a lot of progress. And again, I think athletes have a unique opportunity to do that.
All right, so we've talked about Greek life, we've talked about student athletes, but let's talk about the real constant throughout all of this, the academic institution. What responsibility do faculty, staff, and administration have in this regard?
Again, we all have a piece of this, okay? And so faculty, staff, administration may be interacting with these issues in a different way, okay? But really what that means is if something is reported to a faculty, a staff member, a member of the administration, we have a responsibility to treat that with the care and sensitivity that it deserves, and to offer adequate support and resources to the individuals who may have been impacted by these incidents. And so we take that very seriously here at Penn State. We've done a variety of things that we can talk about here in a second, but I think it does start with that. It starts with a commitment, it starts with training and awareness, and it starts with treating our students and other members of our community with compassion and care.
So let's talk about Penn State specifically. Let's talk about some of the things that have been implemented.
We've done a lot here. We've done a lot here just in the past year. My office, for example, didn't exist a little over a year ago.
Okay.
So I'm the first standalone Title IX coordinator that's been here at Penn State. I am standing up my own office that deals specifically with these issues. And it's not that no one dealt with them before, it's that we didn't have people who were dedicated specifically to this. We didn't have an office that was dedicated specifically to this. And so what that means is we now have a team of individuals here at the university who this is what we do, right? These are the issues that we focus on, whether that's training and education, whether it's tracking information so that we can assess climate issues, or whether it's making sure that we are dealing with individual reports of this stuff in the way that it ought to. We're really refocusing ourselves on that. We've now have a comprehensive array of support resources for students who are affected by this, whether it's free confidential counseling, relationships with public agencies out in the community that we can refer individuals to. We've really taken a holistic look at this issue as a whole and made some real efforts to see what we can do to address it.
So that's really, I think, leads me to my next question, which is, we've talked a lot about the aftermath, everything that happens after the actual assault happens. What measures can female students implement to protect themselves so something like this doesn't happen?
Well, a couple things before I answer that question.
Sure.
I think there are a couple assumptions there that I would like to just sort of challenge very briefly before I address the question. One is that it's on a survivor or a victim to protect themselves from something like a sexual assault, when in actuality, right, I think that we need to put the responsibility on the people who may perpetrate these acts.
Absolutely.
To not perpetrate them. And so I think that's a starting point.
Yep.
I also think it's important to note that sexual assault doesn't only happen to young women, right? It also happens to young men. It's much more underreported in young men for a variety of reasons. But it is important to note that this issue does not discriminate either on the basis of gender. And it also isn't the responsibility of people who may be more or less vulnerable from others to protect themselves from sexual assault. However, I think it's also fair to note that there are risk factors that are involved with these situations, and there are things that people can do to protect themselves or to lower their risk profile, the same as you could lower your risk profile for something like a mugging by not walking down dark alleys and things like that. So not to oversimplify it, I do think it's a fair question in that sense. And so again, when we look at risk factors that are involved, things like alcohol usage and things like that keep popping up over and over again. And so the more that we have young people, men, women, whatever it is, that keep themselves out of high-risk situations, I think the more you're protecting yourself from these things occurring in the first place.
So I'm the father of 2 young children, so I'm several decades off. Thank you very much. A few decades off from before they entered the college environment.
Sure.
But as a parent, there has to be a level of concern that you're sending your child off to higher education, and the safety aspect is of some concern in light of the environment that we've seen in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Now, again, not to make a mountain out of what may be isolated incidents, but what message would you give to parents with this in mind?
I'm also a parent of 3 small children who are a decade or more from going off to college. But that makes this issue, again, particularly important to me. And so as a parent who does this work, what I would say to other parents is, first, understand that while your child is your child and they're unique and special, that they are part of a community in which these things happen at times, okay? And so what that means is we have to understand that we can't afford to sort of say, well, that's not going to happen to my kid, okay? Hopefully it does not, and to the vast majority of parents and kids, it doesn't happen to them, but it does happen. And so we also need to help parents understand that this is not just a college issue, okay? This is an issue that starts long before that. If we don't teach our children and our young people about positive relationship skills, about the dangers of consuming drugs and alcohol in excess, and all those other sorts of things about positive attitudes related to gender and entitlement and things like that, sex positive attitudes. If we don't start that at a young age, then by the time they get to college, we've already inherited a problem. And now you're putting students in a situation where there isn't a lot of parental supervision, there is more access to drugs and alcohol, and all of those things start to fit together to create a pretty high-risk situation. And so I would tell parents, start early, right? It doesn't mean that you have to sit your child down every day and scare the devil out of them, to think they're going to be sexually assaulted every day. However, it does mean that there's a lot of things that we can do for our children to help them learn positive attitudes, which in the end are going to protect them, from these incidents when they do get older.
All right, so let's take the reverse side of that. I'm a student in college, or I'm a student in high school. Maybe I don't have that environment where I can speak about it with my parents.
That's right.
What can I do?
What you can do is you can educate yourself, right? And you can make yourself more aware of the issues. You can choose to attend things like bystander intervention training. Again, nobody ever thinks when they go out on a Friday night, I'm gonna go out and get sexually assaulted tonight, right? And the vast majority of people don't go out on a Friday night and say, I'm gonna sexually assault somebody tonight, right? That's typically not the way that, at least in my experience, the way that it works,
right.
Okay? But so what that means is, we can still protect our friends, right? So you don't have to think this is going to happen to you. You can understand that this is something that happens in the world.
Right.
And if I'm aware of it and I see my friend in trouble, either my friend is about to do something they shouldn't do, or my friend is in a high-risk situation, I can step in and help them out. And to know, that's a life right there, right? That's a life. You can change somebody's life in a moment by knowing when to step in and when to help.
So we've covered a lot of ground, and there's much work to be done. But moving on from the Stanford rape scandal, where do we go from here? And I know that's a very loaded question.
It is.
But I think, like most things in the court of public opinion, we do sometimes want quick fixes. And I know that's not possible here, but what is to be taken from the Stanford rape scandal? Because it does kind of convey that sense that life's not fair. This clearly was not the output many of us were hoping for. Where do we go from here?
That is a very hard question to answer, and you're right. A really effective, long-lasting solution to this issue is not going to happen quickly. But I also think that when these issues come up, whether it's an issue at Penn State or it's at Stanford or it's at Baylor, we can't afford to look at that and say, well, that's Baylor. well, that's Stanford, or that's Penn State. They're different. They're different there, right? We can't afford that. I have to look at the issues at Baylor. I have to look at the issues at Stanford. I have to look at the issues that we have here and say, this is us, right? This is us. This could be us. What can we do to fix that? What we need to do immediately is take ownership, and what we need to do is stand up and say, not here, not now, right? What happened in the past and what happened other places happened, and it's happening. But we're not going to stand for that here, and I think that's where we have to start.
Well, I think to your point, we're definitely not going to solve the problem today, but I do appreciate starting the conversation here on State of Mind. Mm-hmm. Paul, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
That'll wrap up our show for today. If you like what you saw in today's episode, please like, share, comment, and subscribe on the following social media platforms at the bottom of your screen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And remember, every life is a book.
Make it a bestseller.
Have a good night and have a great state of mind.